Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. It's Monday.
Same here.
It's not too bad. I went to Starbucks and got a coffee. When I pulled up to the window, they gave me my coffee and they said, "We accidentally made it iced. Do you want that one too?" I was like, "Yeah."
Yeah.
I got 2 coffees for the price of one.
Bet.
Good morning, Ruby. Good morning, Helen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, hold on. Let me fix something.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Drew.
Not quite at quorum. While we're waiting on everyone to log in, if you haven't had the opportunity to do so, can you please review the minutes?
Good morning, all.
One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So one more, right?
I know Ebony is coming. She said she'd be a couple minutes late.
Right.
Well, I don't think these were few gates, but Patrick and Rachel.
We have 11 members. I don't know how to. I think we might be.
Well, we're definitely over half, right? The 6.
I think you can go ahead and get started, Sharita. You may,
All right,
We
we'll officially
hold off
call the
on-
meeting.
we can hold off on minutes for a bit if you wanted. And get started with some of the other information.
Whereas we have a packed meeting, I'm gonna go ahead and call our meeting to order. It is 10:34 a.m. One second, I had my things on the screen and now I don't see them all. Let's see, okay. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna skip the minutes and we're going to go to item number 2, which is our update on our unsheltered singles and families, and that will be presented by Hanalea. You have the floor.
Rita, can we do that at the end of the meeting?
Sure. Next item is to finish the review and approval of pilot coordinated entry policies.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. All right, so if y'all will remember, we had a few of the piloted coordinated entry policies left that we hadn't gotten to at the last meeting. So hoping that we can get through all of these and vote on them. So the next one is related to by name list attendance. So the original policy says that agencies are limited to 3 absences per year. That was when we were doing monthly meetings. Now that we are doing weekly meetings, I needed to convert the equivalent of 3 absences per year to a percentage. So I have been evaluating people on attending at least 75%, which is the equivalent of 3 per year when we were doing monthly meetings. Just hoping that we can get a vote to formalize that the expectation is that providers attend at least 75% of by name list meetings and other required coordinated entry meetings. If there are any questions, this is an item that requires vote. Oh, but you can't vote right now, Sharita, is that right? You don't have a quorum?
That's correct.
Gotcha. Okay. So then the next item is the permanent supportive housing move-on vouchers. So I believe y'all have already voted on this one. Yeah, that's right. Which was y'all already voted that the people who've decided to remain in a PSH program and need a higher level of support would relinquish their voucher. But I know that Christy, you had previously given some feedback about not feeling like there was enough discussion of this. So if there's any desire to discuss this now, we could.
Sure. Yes, I would love to. Thank you. I have experienced folks with the PSH move on vouchers that choose to remain in the properties, the PSH properties. I don't think that they require a higher level of support. And in fact, the way that our properties are designed and the, staff to client ratio, we do not have the number of staff needed to provide that kind of supportive services. So they would move on without moving on, if that makes any sense. Something that several trainings have talked about that I've been attending. But I think the main issue that pushed me to vote no is that this is client choice. And we have a number of clients who decided to remain in there from their own choosing. So that was the reason that I voted no. I think that we can try to persuade, and since vouchers are portable, we can continue to try to persuade, because I do think that it is beneficial for them to move out and open up another apartment for the PSH folks that are in need of those a higher level of supportive services. But that was not presented to them thus far until we voted recently. That was not presented, and so they were under the impression that since it is a housing choice voucher, that they had the choice to stay there or not.
So I definitely understand that, Christy. In my mind, like if a person has no income, it makes 100% sense to me. But if a person, has income and has been paying that same amount, unless there was a situation where they could not find other housing, so they ended up staying in the PSH, I guess. And we might see that happen.
Right.
It kind of seems pointless to me to have the benefit twice. You get what I'm saying? Like the reduction in cost twice.
I'm sorry, I'm not following you there, Sharita.
Because so when that happens, if they keep the voucher and they stay in PSH, do they have rent or their rent goes to zero?
The rent for housing choice vouchers and permanent supportive housing is approximately the same. It's 30% of their income.
Right. So when a person has both, what happens?
They pay 30% of their income.
So it doesn't change. So couldn't that voucher be used for someone else who doesn't have access to getting rent at 30% AMI, as opposed to somebody staying there who was already going to only be paying that same amount anyway? You get what I'm saying?
I do. Yes.
I mean, because in my mind, it would seem like, okay, you don't need the voucher at this time. Let's offer that voucher opportunity to someone else.
Right. I think the main issue was, like I said, the client choice and the fact that we actually had to relinquish a voucher in the middle of it. We had a tenant who chose to remain at Andover Williams Square, and we had to take the voucher away from them. So therefore their choice was removed. So that was my only contention on that. Like I said, I do think it previously was not in the policies that it was specifically to move on. It was for housing stability. And so that's the lens that I was taking in distributing vouchers, is that this would make them more stable. i.e. if our PSH funding was lost, they would still have a place to stay.
So I think Christy brought this to my attention that the original policies as they were written did not have the word moving on from PSH. And my understanding from working with Erin, who wrote the policy, was that that was the goal. But I think I agree with Christy that the way it was written is not clear. So I am going to bring a change to y'all in that wording in a future meeting that will clarify that so that we won't have that confusion, because it isn't explicit in the policy that, you know, I think what was everyone's understanding when we voted on the policies, which was it was for the purpose of move on.
Right. And unfortunately, I wasn't there to know the intention or when the policy was created. But I believe that's fine. I believe that, you know, we've already voted and are moving forward with this. I do think that is to have a move on, to have them actually move out of PSH units is could be a good thing. But I do also think that someone can move on without moving on. I think PSH is more about the supportive services and less about the rental assistance, whereas housing choice voucher is quite the opposite. It's more about the rental assistance and less about the supportive housing. And that's exactly what would happen even if they stayed in place.
Yeah. So does anyone else have any other responses to what Christy shared or questions, or does this kind of change anyone's thinking about the vote we previously took? I just wanted to make sure there was an opportunity to fully discuss this and see if there was any sort of change desired to the policy.
I'll just say that I have had a little bit of a hard time sort of tracking exactly what, you know, what happens now, what change we're talking about. I feel like for sort of a generalist, we haven't necessarily kind of laid out exactly like what happens now, what is problematic about it, what potentially problematic about it. In general,
so maybe I can just give an overview, Drew. I think we're probably not alone in feeling a bit confused, because this is very like in the weeds of the way we work with our providers. So yeah, so basically, if you zoom back, one of the groups that is eligible for a voucher is a client that is ready to move on from permanent supportive housing. So the first issue that Christy has pointed out to us is that the policy, while it had that intention, did not make that explicit. So we need to make that explicit. We need to call that out, that was the goal. So we're going to do that in a future meeting. But then setting aside
the goal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because currently it says something along the lines of, you know, need a lower level of support or something a little more vague. Then, and, you know, from a community standpoint, the reason we want to provide these vouchers to support people who are ready to move on is because it frees up a PSH slot for another client. So it creates flow through our system, which is something we desperately need.
I agree, that's important. Yep.
So the challenge is particular to project-based PSH, where the unit is tied to permanent supportive housing. So this is not an issue in tenant-based permanent supportive housing where the client can choose to stay in their same unit and use their voucher and nothing about their living situation is going to change. That's where it's easiest. The challenge is in project-based PSH, where if a client says, yes, I'm ready to move on, but then they change their mind and they want to stay in place, it creates this challenge of, well, we haven't actually created a new PSH slot for the community if that client is staying in place. So can that client hold on to that voucher? And the vote that we made was no, that if that client says, I actually want to stay in place, and I'm actually not going to leave the property, and I'm not going to create a new slot in the program for somebody else, that we need to relinquish that voucher to make it available to someone else who is creating kind of a service in the service of our system goals. I think what Christy has brought up is a lot of nuance in that process, that there are a lot of different reasons a client might choose to stay on that property. One reason is a client who literally can't find something else. They've been denied everywhere. And actually, in that case, I have allowed clients to retain their voucher because the idea in my mind is that client is still working towards moving on. They've just experienced some delays. The next one is a client who said, I don't need any more of supportive services. I don't actually want to be in the program. I just like this unit and I don't want to leave. And then the third one is a client who is saying, actually, I've had some kind of change in my life, some change in my state, and actually I still need the program. And in those second two cases, I've said, and we voted to say those clients do need to relinquish their vouchers because they're not really in alignment with the goal of the system, even though, it's a little bit sticky. And I think Christy is right. We need to make it very clear on the front end when clients are having these conversations that, hey, if you're applying for this voucher, that means you're going to leave the property. And if you're not ready to leave the property, even if you still, are not needing these supportive services, you shouldn't apply for this voucher. So part of the challenge is just making it really explicit to clients on the front end. But then there is still this sticky issue with project-based PSH. If a client, feels, I think we need to make sure that clients are really wanting to leave that property before they're applying for the vouchers, which is maybe a challenge because maybe clients are saying they do, and then they're changing their minds. So that's kind of it.
I feel like a lot of this hinges on who has the authority that it's time for somebody to move on from permanent supportive housing, right? We hope we have consensus. But my sense is we could end up in a real pickle if we decide that the clients themselves have the ability to determine whether they move out of a permanent supportive housing project. Is that kind of ultimately what we're talking about? Who has that authority to say it's time for you to move out of this PSH project?
Sort of. So basically the issue is the design of PSH is such that it's supposed to be completely by client choice. Like that is that client spot for perpetuity until that client decides they want to move on. And the assumption when we're doing these vouchers that the client has said, yes, I want to move out. I'm ready to move on. I think the challenge that we're experiencing is, and I don't know, Christy, if you can weigh in how this was working. I don't know if it just wasn't clear to clients when they were saying, yes, I want to move out, I want to move on, that the move on part also included the move out, or if clients were saying in the beginning, yes, I do want to move out, I want to move on, and then they change their mind. It's that part isn't clear to me.
I've experienced both, but in the recent one, and I think and I'm sorry, let me communicate a little bit better. I think in the sense where a person says, no, I'm not ready, they kind of jump the gun and are getting cold feet, and they say, no, I'm not ready to move on. I do need these supportive services. I think that they should relinquish their voucher because therefore the PSH slot is needed. Because again, the PSH is more about those supportive services. In the case that I experienced, we had a person accept a voucher and they fit into the category. The second category that Hanalea mentioned before is I do not need supportive housing, or I do not need the supportive services. I would like the voucher. I just really like this unit and want to use the voucher on this unit. And so that was the one that I was questioning because it is that choice that they remain in there, and we would be taking away that choice if we said no.
Yeah, and I think Christy, you and I have actually an additional thought that I don't think you and I have talked about, and we can talk about this more offline, but I think that the key there is that the clients do need to still be being exited from PSH. Right. And they need to be counted towards that number that y'all have of people on the property who aren't in PSH, because otherwise it is a bit like double dipping, right? Like from the community standpoint of like, you're getting this subsidy and you're getting this subsidy. And so I think if we're doing that, but we're doing that in a way that is consistent, that, okay, you're not in the program anymore, you have the voucher, and we're counting you towards our number of clients who are, community-based clients or whatever. I think that makes a lot of sense and that feels consistent. So I think that's definitely a way that we can thread that needle and just kind of remind of that.
Yes, we've done that and we've actually practiced that before. However, Housing for New Hope, we have 2 site-based permanent supportive housing, and only one of them has additional units that are not dedicated towards the permanent supportive housing, just for folks that are eligible. Okay. So this person, they fell into the one where we do not have any additional units besides the PSH units.
Gotcha.
This situation has been resolved. I think that I don't hear any contentions to change the votes. So I no longer have that. Again, one thing that you said, as long as we can be forthcoming on the front end, that accepting this voucher means that you would have to move out. I think that would be sufficient. However, we have had, I appreciate the grace of the lead agency, because the housing searches are quite difficult and challenging, particularly for this population. So we've had a couple of folks who have this voucher and are unable to find something. Since they are portable and the emergency housing vouchers are immediately portable, we can still continue that housing search while they've accepted the voucher or accepted the placement.
Drew, were you trying to say something?
Well, it sounds like maybe that no kind of immediate action on this proposal is needed at the moment. I'll just say it's sort of interesting and a little strange to me, although I get sort of the impetus behind it, right? That we have such a precious resource here and that is in such short supply. And it seems a strange decision in some ways to me to allow the occupants of the housing to have full control over whether they continue to occupy it or not. I mean, I don't know, you know, it could be that they, you know, that we find ourselves always in alignment with their feeling on that, but with a precious kind of resource like that, it seems to me that, you know, one could make a pretty strong argument for a different way of approaching that. I'll just say that, but sounds like this immediate question is more moot.
So Drew, what I'll add to that is that you got to remember that the folks that are in our PSH projects, some of them have some very severe persistent mental illness that makes living in traditional housing definitely a challenge, and they need the graces and the compassion of PSH in order to be able to sustain a non-homeless situation. So in that regard, you know, that idea of choice, it's a little gray, it's a little murky, it's not clear, it's not black or white. So we do have some people that, you know, maybe long-term PSHers, but then we do have those other people who get some intensive supports and things like that and rehabilitate themselves to a place where they can graduate. And so I think it's a lot deeper. Housing for New Hope has done a lot of work in trying to increase their in-house supportive supports for clients. Because what we also realize is that although some of our folks have mental health providers, the mental health providers are not always doing this work that needs to be done, i.e. the move on strategies, the helping the person rehabilitate in order to go into a less intensive housing situation. And so, I think that plays a big role in it too, because I feel like the way you begin, like you have this term in social work is begin with the end in mind. So the way that when the person comes in the door, you're already evaluating, is this something that you feel like you want to do long term, or is this something you feel like you need some support right now, but then you would like to move on and have your own apartment, and what things do you need and how do we need to help you to get to that place? And so I think that, you know, as Housing for New Hope tries to embrace that, and I think Christy shared with us some of the assessment tools and things like that they're using, you know, we'll get to that place where I think people are kind of clearer on PSH, and there's like a goal and a target to try to get people rehabilitated enough that there is some flow, because we definitely get stuck. So I just wanted to add that context.
Well said, thank you.
Yeah, and I think, Drew, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of just the challenge that we experience is that there is sometimes some conflict between our desire to really honor client choice and also our desire to create as much opportunity in a very scarce resource. So I think that is the challenge of this conversation is how do we do both when our resource is so scarce? And I think you're right. It is a constant challenge. And I think that's what is central in this conversation is that conflict between how scarce this resource is in the community. And because if we had unlimited PSH, this would be a non-conversation, right? Anyone could stay wherever they wanted. And so this is why this is a challenge. And I think you're right, that's kind of the key rub. All right. The final policy, these ones in yellow are just being contemplated at the moment, but the final policy that I'm hoping we can have a vote on if we do ever reach a quorum today is regarding how we prioritize privately owned units that have been set aside for the COC. So we have currently one partnership with a private landlord who's set aside units for the COC. We have another one that's going to be coming up when the property is finished. So we're going to have two, and I expect that as the city kind of streamlines their process of creating these expectations with affordable housing developers, that we'll have more of these. So just wanting to create a standard process. So basically the way that I have been prioritizing these privately owned set aside units that we have with this one landlord right now is prioritizing clients who have been in, based on the length of time that a client has been in housing search. And then after that, first prioritizing clients that are literally homeless over ones that are currently housed. Then after that, clients that are moving on from permanent supportive housing, and then clients that are moving on from rapid rehousing. So this is set up in a way that is really working to try to use these units to serve goals of the system, to shorten length of stay as we see people who have been searching for a really long time, and then end homeless as quickly as possible for long-term homeless clients. And then after that, create flow through PSH, and then after that, create flow through rapid rehousing. So I think this has been working well, and really been helping serve kind of as a safety net for clients who just kind of reach the end of their rope in terms of searching with everyone else. And so wanting to formalize this as a process for how we are prioritizing privately owned units that have been set aside for the COC. Any questions about this, comments?
Hanalea, this also requires a vote.
Yep. Sharita, we still don't have a quorum. So is it, maybe we're just not going to reach a quorum today?
I think you have a quorum, don't you?
We have a quorum now?
I think so.
Yes, we have a quorum. Okay, great.
Can I ask a question, Hanalea? This is another one where, and maybe you just went over this, right? But sort of difference between what is being proposed and current practice.
This is current practice. There's just, in the current policies, there's no policy for this. We didn't have a policy for how we prioritize privately owned units that were not operated with COC funding. And so in the absence of a policy, this has been how we've been doing it. And so now I'm asking to formalize that.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand so is this saying that if a person has a voucher and they're having a hard time in their housing search, that you would prioritize who gets directed to the privately owned units based on these 1, 2, 3, 4?
That's right. So a person could have a voucher, a person could be in rapid housing or in PSH. Basically, we have the pool of clients who are searching for housing, right? And we have one of our landlords who has a set aside unit say, okay, I have one available. We've got all these clients who are searching. How do we decide who we are going to refer to that landlord? And the way we're doing it now, and the way I'd like to formalize it is The first thing we're doing is based on who's been searching for housing the longest. So the client who's been searching the longest is referred to that unit. If we have a bunch of clients who've all been searching the same amount of time, then we go to the categories after that.
I don't know if I agree, but you guys can
Can I say something?
chime in.
Hello, can I say
Yeah.
something right quick?
Uh-huh.
So you're saying the person that has searched somewhere to live the longest is the one that gets the entitlement to the voucher, not the severity of the need for the person to have housing?
So this is not about a subsidy. This is about being referred to a unit that a landlord has set aside for the COC. So this has nothing to do with how much you pay.
No. I'm just saying about, so say like a woman with 4 kids and what a woman with kids needed that's sleeping in a car. You have her put here to the side. That's number one search. But then you got somebody that's been searching longer than what this woman have. So that person that's been searching longer gets the voucher over top of the woman and kids are sleeping in the car.
This is nothing to do with vouchers. This is just about referrals. to a
Housing.
unit.
Let's change the word housing.
Right. So yeah, that's right. So let's say we
Okay.
have 10 people who all received vouchers in December. Okay, which is a very similar, which is what's happening right now, is I've got 10 people received vouchers in December. Let's say 5 of those people, they found housing. They're housed, they found housing. Great. 5 more of those people have not yet found housing. Okay, then you have people maybe who've received vouchers in January. You've got 10 who received vouchers in January, and you've got 10 who received them in February. First thing would be, we'd be looking at the clients who had received their vouchers in December because they've been searching the longest. After that, then we prioritize the clients who are currently homeless, who've been searching since December, over the clients who are not currently homeless. Does that make sense?
Not to me, but go ahead.
I'm reading what you have and I understand what your thought is, but I think it's more complicated than that. Because I think we need to look at the acuity of the client. And just knowledge of the client, because what you don't want to do is put somebody in a unit because they've been searching the longest and they go in and ruin this privately owned partnership relationship. So as bad as that sounds, we got to remember we're trying to create more housing. So I think that you have to take the match process into consideration. You need to think about neighborhood. You need to think about what that person's challenges are. So that if the area is, if the unit is nice, but it's in an area with high crime, there may be some people that don't want that, can't tolerate that or triggered by it, things like that. I just think it's more complicated than this 1, 2, 3, 4.
So in terms of the client's desire to have that unit or be in the property, this is something where we're offering the unit to the client. This is not something where the client has to take the unit.
Right,
So
but we have some folks who've had such a hard time with finding housing, and I know because I've got a couple that have been housed. They take what they can get, whether it's a good fit or not, because they take what they can get because they've been looking for a long time, and it turns into a bad, a bad situation because they took what they could get.
I mean, that is the reality of what we're dealing with. I will say, I don't know that there is any way to avoid that. Basically, what we are dealing with right now in Durham is we have people who are just not going to be accepted into housing unless they accept these COC set aside units. That's essentially what this is doing. These are the people who've been denied everywhere. And this is their last shot. And that is who is being prioritized for these units. That is correct. And basically what we are seeing, this is the population that their choice is do not get a unit, relinquish your voucher because you're going to stay homeless and maybe you'll wait for something else like PSH. If you had a voucher, maybe you need a higher level support or stay in PSH. We were just talking about this, people who can't find anything, they've been denied everywhere. This is who we are serving. They have been denied everywhere and this is their last chance. They have, of course, they have the ability to turn that down and some have. But yes, you're
Right.
right, Sharita. There are people who will take that because it is their only option. And while that's not ideal, I think the position that we've taken is that that's better than nothing.
And I understand what you're saying, but once that person's in that space, a person like me is the one that gets all of the complaints about where they house them, and have to live that and try to figure out how to fix it, how to keep them there, because there are certain mechanisms that we don't have in the community that people like me and Miss Carolyn ended up having to pick up. So I just want
Absolutely.
to be mindful of that. In my mind, that PSH move on person or that rapid rehousing person would probably be the more ideal candidate to go into the privately owned unit. The PSH, the reason why I say that, because if there's another person in housing search that doesn't have income who would be better in PSH, moving the PSH person out and moving that person in would be better in my mind, because you kill two birds with one stone. You get two people housed instead of one. And the likelihood that that person is going to be ready, because hopefully they've had some preparation in the PSH phase and could have not necessarily a perfect housing, first housing out of PSH experience, but I think that their chances would be higher that they would know how to navigate themselves and reach out for support. So I just think that we need to think about this, because sometimes that lengthened housing search, it's a reason why there's a lengthened housing search, and that person needs some support. Even if they don't have a mental health provider, somebody being at a Williams Square or Andover is better than them having nobody. You get what I'm saying?
I do. Yeah. I mean, we can definitely switch 2 and 3, which I think is what you're saying, Sharita. I've gone back and forth on whether we should be prioritizing literally homeless clients or PSH move on clients first, for the same reasons you're talking about. So I definitely could switch 2 and 3, and that I think that would be reasonable. And I agree with you. I think like I said, I've done some sometimes and some other times for each reason, because sometimes it's really hard to watch people stay on the street, right? But other times you do want to create that move through effect, right? So yeah, I think if there's support from the group for that, I don't have any qualms about switching 2 and 3. We can definitely do that.
I mean, I don't know how anybody else thinks of it, but I live this. I live this every day. So
I actually agree with what is written. I think, like, in my experience at Housing for New Hope, it's almost like you have to choose. So Sharita, like in your situation and your example that you gave, if we give the prioritized unit to move on clients, yes, I do believe that they are better fits to I guess save our relationships, maintain our relationships with the private landlords. But then where does the literally homeless person go? I mean, that person is
into the PSH unit.
But if they're not prioritized for the PSH, yet still have barriers, I think that number one, and this is kind of addressing Angel's point earlier, typically the folks that have the length of time in the housing search and the barriers and the number of barriers are the same. Typically they are in housing search longer because of the number of barriers. And the barriers don't necessarily have to include a disability. We have one client right now with a 28-page criminal background history. We're having a really hard time finding a place to put him. He does not qualify for permanent supportive housing, and he's not a move on. Therefore, where does he go? Is he just not going to be housed? And if they aren't going to be housed, then all of our grants that make up the COC, we won't be able to fulfill those grants and do proper grant management, and our community will not see those dollars.
Yeah, I think these are both really important points. And this is in real time talking about the challenges we face in prioritizing client, right? There's sort of no right answer, there's no wrong answer, because you have so many vulnerable clients and so much need, right? And so few units these days. But I think the point Sharita makes about creating move through in PSH, and this is, you can see why I've gone back and forth, is a good one. I think Christy also makes a really important point that it's not like if a PSH unit comes available, the client who had a voucher would have gotten that unit. There are other clients who, granted, are extremely vulnerable and have a lot of need, but who will get that unit. So that client with a voucher is going to remain homeless and is going to remain searching, because the reason they got that voucher in the first place is likely because they're a lower priority for PSH. So it's sort of a lose-lose situation. How we want to do it, whether we want to prioritize creating move through in PSH so that that higher vulnerability client who's on the waiting list for PSH can get a slot, or we want to, immediately move through that client who is currently homeless and is searching with their voucher. I think that's a community values decision. There's sort of no right and no wrong answer here. But I think it is an important point to really make sure that y'all understand that if that spot is created in PSH, it's not the client with the voucher who's searching who's going to get that spot. Other thoughts?
I also want to throw in that number 3 and number 4, the PSH and rapid rehousing move on. I realize that different agencies are operating differently, but definitely a lesson learned for Housing for New Hope is to provide those supportive services along the way while they are in the rapid rehousing or PSH program. And I believe I sent out an assessment tool that we just started using. I sent it out last month. So ideally, the candidates for PSH and rapid rehousing move on are at a higher level and reduce their barriers and are in need of less supportive services, but still in need of rental assistance. So ideally, it would be a little bit easier for those PSH move-ons and rapid rehousing move-ons because they've had that kind of prep work. Now, my experience is that I've seen that not everybody receives that kind of prep work before trying to move on. So that's something that I think we could remedy by making sure they have the proper supportive services in place.
All right, so all 3 of these are items requiring a vote. If people want, I don't know that we've reached consensus on this last one. I will say if this group chooses not to vote today, essentially you leave it in a situation where I'm making a judgment call because we don't have a policy. So I'm just letting you know the alternative of not voting. You could give me some guidance on how you operating, but it doesn't seem like we have a consensus on what that is. So, but we do need to vote, and we are kind of at this point over time on this item. We do need a vote on all 3 of these policies. Yeah, Angel, go ahead.
So how many people are missing from this meeting right now? I'm asking that because if it's a high number, shouldn't those people have the opportunity to be present to vote? Wouldn't their opinions carry this vote to be written in stone?
Well, I think everybody's on now. So I don't know if they have, if they have any questions about the things that we just talked about. As Hanalea said, these are items requiring vote.
You could always
Emily,
vote.
Colleen, Helen, Lavette.
My only question about it is whether we have to, can we vote on all 3 individually?
Yes.
So.
You can vote on the ones that you're comfortable voting on, and if there's ones that you want to spend more time discussing or thinking through, you can move that to another meeting and spend more time digging into it and discussing it if you wanted to.
So I do want to clarify, there are actually only 2 ones that require a vote. The second one, if y'all remember, I'm sorry, I misspoke. That was just a discussion of an item we'd already voted on. So what we need to vote on is the 75% requirement for attendance and coordinated entry meetings. And then this issue of prioritization of privately owned units. Colin's right, we can continue to discuss, but I did want to point out that the alternative of waiting is that there continues to not be a policy, and I will continue to operate with my best judgment. So just want to make that clear to the group. And I think if there is more to say, we can say it, but if there is not more to say and people just don't know what to do, I think we need to make a decision, because there is not a policy. So. Mhm.
I do
I
have
have a
one more
question.
thing.
I know, I'm sorry.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Ebony.
I know I'm late, so I wanted to kind of circle back to the 75%. How would, what accommodation will be in place for those families who do not have cell phones, internet services to be able to attend these meetings? Is there anything that we can put in place? Is it just they're not, can you, I probably missed what you were saying about that.
Yeah, I mean, this
I wanna know
is
what
for
accommodation.
providers. 75% attendance is required for providers in the meetings.
So not the actual client. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Mhm.
And Hanalea, maybe I'll just ask this in a yes, no way. Do we have a really clear way that everybody can understand for measuring length of time in active housing search?
Yeah, so we have the date that the client receives the subsidy as the beginning of their housing search. And whether that's entry into rapid rehousing, entry into PSH, or attendance at a voucher orientation date, and that begins their search.
Okay, thank you. Move approval of these two policies.
I have a motion by Drew. I entertain a second. Or do y'all want to do these individually?
My preference is for them to be done individually. This is Colleen.
Okay, let's do it. Move approval of, I don't know what to call it, the policy in line 12, about the 75%.
I have a motion about the 75% attendance policy for service providers. I'll entertain a second.
Ms. Helen,
Any questions? If you are for this, vote yay in the box. If you are against it, nay. And anybody who needs to abstain can do so. All right, looks like that motion carries. We have a second potential opportunity for a motion on the floor. I will entertain a motion at this time.
I have a question.
Okay.
And the question is for Hanalea, we're saying in the by name list meetings, you're going to use your objective opinion to determine what we will do versus there being a policy saying this is what we will do. Is that correct?
We do not vote. If we don't vote, she's gonna use her best judgment. Otherwise, she's gonna follow the information identified in this box here.
And do we have, because I know you said that there is no policy, but do we have information on how the process that exists currently, which is what you said is in writing, how effective that's been, or who and how people are impacted by the decisions that are made? And like, I guess the question becomes how well our clients do in moving into those private units. Are they able to stay, or are they being rotated back out again? Or their owner complaints, things like that? That's what I'm trying to see. How well does this work with the current policy?
I can say anecdotally, it's working really well. That I can't think of anyone who's been moved in through this process who we've gotten any major complaints or had to move out. Christy, can you think of anyone?
No, it's worked well, but it hasn't been that long.
Right, which is why we
Right.
can't give like definitive data. So it's mostly just anecdotal. So far, it's going well. And we can do a preliminary approval and review it again in 6 months. I just want to have something in writing, so I'm not just sort of operating in lieu of a policy. But again, someone can make a motion to keep it as written. Someone can make a motion to approve it, but move on ahead of literal homelessness. We had kind of both arguments on the call. So but I just really think it's important that we have something in writing over me just making my best judgment.
Hanalea, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you? Okay. So did you say right now you're you're going by who's been searching the longest,
Right.
whether they are sheltered or unsheltered, it doesn't matter. It's just whoever's been searching the longest.
That's correct.
I will entertain a motion on this item.
Move this one as well.
I have a motion by Drew. I'll entertain a second.
I second that motion.
Is that Christie?
This is Christy, yes.
Seconded by Christie. All those in favor or opposed or abstaining, you have the right at this time to vote in the chat box. All right, looks like the motion carries.
This is
I
Heidi.
think-
Yeah,
Go
but
ahead.
since this was, there are a lot of complicated nuances to this, and I just want to say how much I appreciate that fact that there are these complicated nuances that you all who are in this, field doing this work every day understand so well. And there are differing opinions because it is really hard. Maybe we should get a report back, after 6 months or so and, hear how it's going. Maybe there will be more evidence that this is the way to go, or we should tweak it a bit.
I can definitely do that. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. This will be something we'll try out, and I'll report back to you all on how it's going. Right, thanks so much, everyone. I appreciate the discussion and the thoughts on all of this very complicated issue.
Our agenda is just it's just a comment. We can have some discussion, but we have 36 minutes left in our meeting, and Hanalea has some equity information she needs to share with us that is set up for 40 minutes. So the remaining of our meeting. I think that this vote and review is an example of kind of what I hope to see in the future for policy and planning for the subcommittee. Sometimes I get a little frustrated. It's very quiet. There's not a lot of conversation. There are not as many service providers that I think need to be in this space on this meeting. And we don't want to get to a point where we are just passing stuff through from recommendations from from community development, because we see them, they're the lead agency, but we have people doing this work every day. And I think that they have things that they can add to this discussion. I think that it would help make this committee more effective, and not always having silence, but we are nearing the end of another year. Transitions are going to happen. There may be a new chair next year. For the next half of the fiscal year, or the new fiscal year. And we just need to think about where we want policy and planning to go, where, how well are we as policy and planning informing the bigger HSAC? I think we need to have a lot of understanding and education about our system. And it needs to be informed by the people who do the work every day, more than just like me and Christy, because they know a lot of the nuances and the grays. And so, I hope that this committee will get to that place where we can truly hash some things out and talk about some stuff and come up with some new and innovative and forward ways of thinking that comprises a lot of opinions, but us trying to figure out how to make it the most effective and most impactful for the city of Durham. That's all I want to say about it. I don't know if anybody has any comments, but I just wanted to share that. And then Hanalea, the rest of the meeting is yours.
All right, thanks so much, Sharita. As Sharita mentioned, we have less time than budgeted for this. This is extremely important, and I suspect is going to take longer than the time we have left. So we will start this discussion and get as much of it as we can through, but I do not want to rush it because I think it's really important that we give it the time it deserves. All right, so if y'all will remember, about 7 months ago, y'all approved a piloted housing prioritization policy that was created specifically in response to our findings around racial equity issues with our old prioritization process. You specifically requested that 6 months into implementing that policy that I do a redone evaluation of racial equity and bring that back to y'all. So this is that planned report back. All right, just as a reminder about the basics of how our current prioritization pilots work. So prioritization for housing is based on a combination of client vulnerability and their likelihood to self-resolve. Vulnerability is defined as potential or experienced harm to the household due to continued homelessness, and is evaluated based on a vulnerability assessment. Likelihood to self-resolve is now based on an inventory of housing barriers that the client experiences. High priority clients for permanent supportive housing are based on a permanent supportive housing needs assessment. All right, so comparison of the current prioritization score, which is a combination of vulnerability and housing barriers, to the disparities we were seeing with the VI SPDAT. So we have improved but not resolved our racial disparity issues, essentially is the bottom line. Previously, the VI SPDAT had a 1.21 point disparity on average, which was 7.12% of available points. Now we have in our new process, we have a 1.14 point disparity, which is 4.38% of available points in the new process. So an improvement, but not an elimination of the disparities. This slide, I'm not going to read out individually. I put it in and it's in the email that y'all sent for those who wanted to dig in more deeply into what made up those disparities. This goes into how much of a disparity there is in the housing barrier score versus the vulnerability score, what's going into that, and then looking at it for chronic clients. The bottom line is that there is disparities in both the housing barrier assessment and the vulnerability score, but the disparities in the vulnerability score are larger. And for chronically homeless clients, the disparity in the housing barrier assessment is larger, but the disparity in the vulnerability score is smaller. And overall, the disparity in the prioritization is smaller for chronically homeless clients, which is a good thing because those are more vulnerable clients and we want to make sure they're getting what they need. But again, this is for anyone who wants a breakdown of the individual points. This is in the slideshow that was sent out to you. All right, so then looking individually at prioritization of rapid rehousing. So this is very good news. We have essentially eliminated the disparity in prioritization for rapid rehousing. I would say a 1% disparity is the kind of thing that kind of waxes and wanes and is considered kind of in the margin of error. So I would consider there to be no existing disparity in our prioritization for rapid rehousing, which is great news. Not such good news on the PSH side of things. So there is a disparity in our PSH priority group allocation. So basically, previously, this is how things were before we changed the process. So before we changed the process, there was a 35% disparity between the overall population of chronically homeless clients that were Black or African American, and those that were being put in the high priority group for PSH. So that's a huge disparity, and that, you know, that was one of the things we really wanted to respond to. So now we have reduced, again, a reduced but not eliminated the disparity. So now there is a 5% disparity between the percent of chronically homeless clients that are Black or African American and those that are being put in the high priority group for PSH. And so that's good. We've significantly reduced. Going from 35% to 5% is a huge reduction, but we are continuing to see a disparity. However, that 5% is just who's in the group. That doesn't actually tell you who gets housing. So there's actually a 17% disparity in who is actually prioritized for PSH. And that was alarming to me, to say the least. Why, if we only have a 5% disparity in the group, do we have a 17% disparity in who is actually getting PSH? And so this slide is really intended to tell you about that story of how we get to that 17% disparity. So we start off again with this small 5-6% disparity, depends on how you round, in the racial breakdown of clients who are chronically homeless compared to the entire population. When you look at the PSH needs assessment, and you look at everyone who has a score of 3 or above, you have that 5% disparity that we talked about. When you look at clients who were 4 or above, though, it increases to a 9%. And the reason this is important is previously, before I conducted this assessment, we were sorting clients who were 4 or above first and looking at all of them for PSH. And then only if we had slots left were we looking at clients that were 3 or above. After I did this assessment and I realized the problem, I immediately switched to looking at clients that were 3 or above together with clients that were 4 or above. So that already reduced it. But previously what we were doing was creating this 9% disparity. But you still then have from 9% to 17%. How do you get there? That's an additional 8% disparity between who's in the group that's being looked at for PSH and who was actually being prioritized for PSH. So I had to dig deeper to figure out what was going on. Oh, I wanted to tell the rest of the story before getting into the changes. And here we go. So I feel like I'm missing a slide. Maybe I didn't put in a separate slide about it. I just expected myself to explain it. That must be it. I'm sorry, y'all. All right. So basically, I had to do a lot of digging to figure out what was happening in between that 9% disparity and that 17% disparity. And basically what is happening that's creating that additional 8% disparity is 2 things. One, we rely on providers to tell us what their clients need. And when we actually look at this high priority group and who the providers are telling us need permanent supportive housing versus clients who are being stepped down to a lower level support like a voucher or rapid rehousing, that is disproportionately happening with Black and African American clients. So it's hard to know what's really going on. I suspect some level of unconscious bias in terms of how providers interpret the disabilities of their clients. They're kind of disproportionately stepping down their Black and African American clients compared to white clients. But that's not the entirety of the story. The other piece of it is documentation requirements for PSH. So compared to, say, a rapid rehousing, there is a lot of documentation required to be able to be referred for permanent supportive housing. And when I looked at who was in that group, who the providers were saying needed PSH, the clients who were Black or African American were less likely to have all of their documents. And so what it appears is happening is that when you add the kind of biased assessment of need to the issues of documentation, that's where you get this additional 8% disparity. And so, you know, that's not a simple fix of, okay, let's just change the assessment. That's a much more complex and nuanced issue that really requires a lot of attention. And I'm going to go in later about what kind of solutions I see to this, but I just really wanted to make this clear about part of the story of how we get to this disparity is the way we're assessing need, but another almost equally sized part is a more nuanced issue of how the providers are communicating their needs to us, to their clients' needs to us, and the challenges that they're having getting clients' document ready. I want to pause here because this is, I know, a lot of information, just to see if there are any questions, comments on anything I've shared so far.
Oh, yeah, this is Drew. This sort of reminds me of all the studies of employment discrimination that you see. And it would be interesting to me to, to at some point to sort of create some, generic profiles and sort of, run some testing on our system in that way. I think it's important to kind of do what we're doing to try to reduce these disparities, but I also feel like we're making a sort of variety of assumptions along the way, right? And that at least in some cases, could be tested. And I think it would be interesting. The examples I'm thinking of, which some of you may be familiar with, right? But if you send out identical resumes, right? One with Tyrone on it and one with Todd on it, right? They get vastly different reviews by hiring managers, right? And so things like that. And I think it would be interesting to kind of think about probing our system of evaluating people and testing people a little bit more than we're able to right at the moment. But I do appreciate all of this attention and our efforts to just try to make these gaps smaller.
Yeah, Drew, I think it's a good point that, and I think this is definitely one of my overall points with this presentation is I have recommendations for y'all. I definitely have things we can do to reduce these issues. They're not going to eliminate the issues. And I think this is something we need to continue evaluating on an ongoing basis because we need to, it's clearly this is embedded into everything we're doing. And we are not going to be able to eliminate this with one policy. So we need to be vigilant and continue assessing this on an ongoing basis. So I think that's definitely one of my overall recommendations to y'all is this should not be the last conversation that we have about this by any means. Any other questions or thoughts? All right.
Doesn't sound like it. Thank you, Annalee. I can't believe we got through that so quickly.
No, I'm not done, Sharita. I just paused for this. Yeah, no, there's a lot more to go.
Okay, I was gonna say, I thought we were done.
All right. So now what I want to talk about is digging into what is creating the disparity in the actual assessments and how I recommend changes to reduce those disparities. So specifically, this slide looks at items that were creating disparities in the vulnerability assessment and in the PSH assessment. So what you see on the left is the level of disparity between Black and African-American clients versus white clients. A positive percentage disparity means that white clients have more of this than Black clients. A blue disparity means there's no difference. And green or a negative number means that actually Black clients are ranking higher than white clients on this. So basically, all of the items in red are items that are contributing to this disparity. So basically across the board, we see approximately a 10% disparity in reporting of disabilities between Black and African-American clients versus white clients. I do not believe that there is actually a difference in the experience of these disabilities. I think probably what is happening is a combination of disparities in access to diagnosis and also some disparity in self-reporting that we see kind of across self-report measures. We see a smaller disparity, and I would say less significant, 4% is pretty small, in clients' report of their months unsheltered in the past 2 years. So that's a good thing is we're seeing a fairly small disparity in that. The story with reporting of justice involvement is really interesting. So initially we saw a 9% disparity between Black or African American clients versus white clients. This was extremely surprising to me because we had actually thought that justice involvement would be one of those items that would go in the other direction based on, historic experiences with the justice system in these populations. What I did was I went and cross-checked what clients were self-reporting to publicly available North Carolina records. And after correcting everyone's self-reports with publicly available records, this disparity reduced to 3%. So not completely eliminated, but basically completely eliminated this disparity. And so what appears to be happening is not actually a disparity in actual experiences with the justice system, but a disparity in willingness to report that to us. And so I think that's really interesting and really meaningful and speaks to generally this kind of issue of self-report disparities that we continue to experience.
Hanalei, can you be clear about who is sort of misreporting or over or underreporting what when you say all that?
Yeah. So for all of these items, Black or African American clients are underreporting. Yeah. And so basically what happened when I went through all of the North Carolina records was I added a bunch of stuff that is on their record, but they weren't reporting to us, and that essentially eliminated the disparity. Clients with one or more hospital stay, there is a 16% disparity where Black or African American clients are 16% less likely to report one or more hospital stay. So this is the largest disparity in this direction, and to me, the most concerning. That's a really large disparity. Yeah, Drew, do you have a question?
And so when you do your checking, it eliminates the disparity. I mean, that's you doing some extra work, which our system may not always do, right? So is the point of all this to figure out how our system can do this kind of work permanently, so we are getting more accurate scores and thereby reducing disparities? Is that the point of this?
Yes, the point of this is that there are going to be recommendations for how we reduce these disparities overall. That's right.
Well, it
That's
just
correct.
blows my mind that we have people going into programs and these are not general questions that you ask your client about these things right here and get an answer.
They are questions that are being asked, but the answers we're getting are disproportionately being underreported among Black and African American clients.
Even when they are answers which would prioritize them more highly for the services we hope they get.
Correct.
Which makes me wonder, do they know that having a mental health disability or chronic health condition would place them with higher priority? Is that really clear, do you think?
I think that is an open question. I would hope, and since this has come out, that is definitely one of the things I've been counseling the providers to do, is to make sure the clients understand why they're asking these questions and what the answers mean. So we would have hoped that people were already doing that. We're explicitly encouraging people to do that now. It is not clear what effect that will have, though, because it's not clear how much that was happening before. But yes, that is one thing that we want to make sure people are doing, is explaining, if you answer this, what happens. That's right. Yeah.
I have a question. Did you get is there any reporting on like why clients are not reporting their information?
I mean, there's feedback, nuanced feedback, but there's not, nothing definitive, right? There's just anecdotal feedback. Yeah. Which is, I think, what we're talking about is, I think a lot of it is, what we see in all of the research is anytime you have these kinds of self-report records, you're going to have underreporting in Black and African American clients. And that was what we were seeing with the VI-SPDAT too, right? So one of the things we were trying to get away from was self-reporting, but at some point you can't completely eliminate self-reporting. So we sort of know that there is a self-reporting bias. And I think one of the things that we're going to need to do, as you see these items lower down, they have the opposite bias. And if you notice, those are things that aren't being self-reported. Age, previous housing attempts, these are things we know, right? So you notice that difference there, self-report versus information we already have. So we're going to need to change the weight of items that don't require self-report so that we can reduce that disparity. Because at some level, we don't have access to people's medical records. We're not going to be able to move away from self-report on some of these items.
Yeah, I was just getting at why people don't report because their fear of not being able to get help.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ruby. I think even if people are being told this will help you, I don't know that they are going to fully believe it, right? Because of previous experiences with systems. So we want to encourage people to explain it. The extent to which that's going to eliminate this disparity is unclear.
Okay, I just wanted to help clarify, Drew, and
yeah. Thanks, Ruby.
And Commissioner Carter as well.
Mm-hmm. So on the right, you see how much value each of these things has in the vulnerability assessment and the PSH needs assessment. That's just informational. Later on, we're going to be talking about changing these values, but I just wanted to make sure everyone knew how much some of these items only go into one of the assessments, some of these items go into both.
I do have a question for you, Hanalia. Do you think that some of the things that we have to rely on self-report on, such as hospital stay, even like disability, do you see the COC being able to substantiate that or verify that a little bit more at the intake stage?
The truth is that I don't. No. I think that we are I honestly, Christy, I think this represents our best ability to substantiate. And I think the disparities would be a lot bigger if we weren't doing that. What I will say is I think we can continue to try to bring more, particularly behavioral health, but also medical providers into our by name list process. And that will improve, when we have a Carolina Outreach or a Southlight on and they're able to look up, we had it the other day where we had a provider on and they looked it up and they said, well, this client has such and such substance abuse diagnosis. We had an indoor substance abuse. We were able to right in that moment, give that point. But on some level, I think we're never going to really fully get to substantiation because of the issue we have with privacy of medical records. I think there is a conversation to be had about universal consent so that we can partner better with the medical partners. And I think that's beyond this conversation. I think that's a future conversation to have, like, next steps about how we better partner with our medical and behavioral health partners and how we reduce the confidentiality barriers that we experience to that. But I'm not really going to be able to fully go into that today, but I think it's an important question.
Right. And of course, I see your comment, Rita, about taking advantage of the healthcare for the homeless clinic. And, we have a lot of Duke clinics. So if we could get some kind of integration of that, it would be wonderful. But yes, I see the barriers. Thank you.
I would say let's put that, whoever's taking minutes in kind of in the parking lot for a future agenda item to discuss. All right. So we get to some recommendations. This is my recommendation for changes to the point value of items on the vulnerability assessment. So on the left, you see the value in the original pilot, and on the right, you see the value that I'm recommending. I have increased the value of unsheltered time since the disparity there was very, very small, reduced the value of chronic health disabilities and substance abuse disabilities since those had fairly large disparities. I am recommending completely eliminating our evaluation of hospitalizations. I thought about it a lot, and I just think that the disparity is too large to justify continuing to evaluate this. And I just can't see anything that we can do to change this. And so I'm recommending removing it from the assessment. And then everything else would stay the same. So this is my first recommendation, my first formal recommendation of an actual policy change. Any thoughts, questions?
Hanley, it would help me just if you could talk briefly about the 3 places where you're making a proposal to change the points.
Mm-hmm.
It just, a couple sentences on why you think something deserves, I guess in all 3 cases, right, we're reducing the number of points. I can imagine, but I'd rather not imagine. I'd rather hear it, straight from you.
Yeah, I'm recommending reducing the points for the 2 disabilities because of the sort of consistent issues that we have with self-reporting disparities and the fact that I don't see any immediately resolvable solution to those disparities. So I'm just recommending reducing the value of them so they don't weigh so heavily on the assessment. And I'm recommending eliminating hospitalization from the assessment altogether because the disparities are just so large and I don't feel good about our ability to do anything about them.
Thanks.
Mhm. All right, I'm going to keep moving. All right, next is recommend changes to the housing barrier assessment. So I want to be clear, this is not everything in the housing barrier assessment. The housing barrier assessment is huge. It has a lot of things in it, and it's not possible for me to fit it all on a slide. So these are only the items that had meaningful disparities and for which I'm recommending changing the point value. So on the left here, you see the value of the disparity. Again, red means that Black or African-American clients were reporting less of this, are getting less points for this than white clients. Green means Black or African-American clients are getting more points for this than white clients. And actually in the case of the green item, this is not something that was previously assessed and I'm recommending adding it to the assessment. So a lot of these are pretty surprising. At least to me, maybe they're not surprising to others, but they're not necessarily things I would have expected to have disparities. So clients who have zero income, there is actually an 11% disparity in where clients who are Black or African-American are much less likely to have zero income and therefore to get those points. So I am recommending reducing the value of that. I actually don't see that as probably as much of a high barrier item as that, because currently in the system, it's getting the maximum number of points. I'm recommending reducing it sort of to a moderate level, which I think is actually more in line with the level of barrier it represents, since we have a lot of clients with subsidies and other things that can pay, and also will reduce the amount this disparity is weighing on the assessment. So these disparities on justice involvement, I want to say, are after I did all of the corrections in the system. So these are remaining disparities after I did all of the records corrections. So there's a 5% disparity in clients reporting pending felony charges. And this is not something we can cross-check with publicly available records, as opposed to actual conviction.
You actually can. You can go to the North Carolina NC Court's website. If you have that person's last name and their first initial, you can look up their active court dates.
All right, Sharita, that is information I didn't have. So actually, I could go through and check the records like I did for the convictions and could report back. I suspect probably that will eliminate this disparity. So we may not want to necessarily make that change. For clients reporting needing an ADA disability accessible unit, surprisingly, there's a 7% disparity here, 7% less likely among Black and African-American clients to report this need. I am very curious whether this is, again, people being more willing to say, oh, I could make it work. I don't necessarily have that need. I'm not clear on why, but I am recommending slightly reducing the value of this to account for the disparity. Clients having a felony charge. Again, this is something I don't believe I can cross-check unless with no conviction. Sharita, are you aware of any way that I can cross-check that?
You said felony with no conviction?
A previous charge with no conviction?
Probably the State Bureau. I think I've gotten it before. We have to talk offline about that.
Okay. So currently my understanding is that I cannot cross-check this, and therefore I'm recommending reducing the value by 0.5 point. Clients reporting that they have a pet or undocumented service animal. There is a 4% disparity, recommending reducing this by 0.5%. Client has a pending misdemeanor charge. Again, I did not think I could cross-check this based on what Sharita said I can, so I probably can eliminate that disparity. Client has a misdemeanor conviction in the last 10 years. This, with all the cross-checking, continued to have a 6% disparity, so I am recommending reducing this by 0.5 point. And then clients being on the by name list for 365 days or more. So this disparity goes in the other direction. So actually, Black or African-American clients are 17% more likely to be on the by name list for a year or more than white clients, which makes sense given all of the things we talked about the other disparities. So I'm actually recommending adding 3 points for this item that will help balance out some of the other remaining disparities in the assessment. Any questions or thoughts about this? Okay. All right, so if we make all of these changes, I want to show you what will happen in terms of the disparity. So we can't, at the moment, I cannot find a way to completely eliminate the disparity in the prioritization score. I want to be transparent about this, but I can reduce it somewhat. So basically, we talked about the VS FDAT had the 7% disparity. The existing prioritization score had a 4.3% disparity. With these changes, we can get the prioritization score down to a 0.8 point value or a 3.81% disparity. I think with this combined with the changes that I'm recommending to the PSH prioritization, I'm hoping that we can eliminate the disparity in actual allocation of housing, even if we can't do it in the actual point value. So change, I may not have time to do this, 2 more minutes. Okay, Sharita, can I keep going or do you have something you need to use for the last 2 minutes?
We need to approve the minutes.
Okay. I would like to just put in a caveat here that I'm very eager to start using the new pilot because knowing this disparity exists and not responding to it is very concerning to me. So I was hoping to walk away from this meeting being able to start using the new pilot. We don't necessarily have to vote, but I would like to move forward with using the new process to reduce that disparity. But I don't know if y'all have thoughts about that or if I should wait another month. I don't want to continue perpetuating this when we know it exists. But I know we haven't had time to get through everything. So I will stop there.
So you would like to pilot doing the recommendations you're trying to get through right now?
That's right. I think my thought is that 6-ish months ago, y'all said, well, we'd like to pilot this before we vote to see if it works. I've come back to y'all 6 months later and said, well, it's an improvement, but it's not really fully achieving our goals. And so I think what's appropriate is another 6-month pilot of the changes. And then coming back to you again in 6 months and seeing if we've achieved our goals.
Based on the information Hanalea has shared today, do you guys feel comfortable with going forward with a vote on this, allowing her to pilot some of these changes? Or would you like to wait until she has the opportunity to fully finish this? How much more time do you need?
Just for the last 2 slides, probably another 5 minutes.
Or we can listen to the last 5 minutes and then try to get a vote and go over maybe 10 minutes. Are folks able to do that?
Yes, I'm able to listen to the last couple of slides.
I am as well.
All right. Well, Hanalea, let's go ahead and try to get it done by 12:10.
I appreciate y'all's commitment to sticking around. All right, so the next thing is changes to the permanent supportive housing needs assessment. I'm not going to go one by one through this because of our time sensitivity, but I want to point out that I am slightly reducing the value of substance abuse and chronic health disabilities as a result of the disparity in reporting of those items, and then actually recommending adding some new items that do not have the kind of disparity issues, and actually in some cases go in the other direction to help balance this out, which include times that the client has been on the by name list, which we talked about in the last slide, and then also the number of times we've attempted to prioritize a client, but they actually never even got into housing, which has been sort of discussed in the by name list process with the providers as another indicator of a client's level of need for PSH or rapid rehousing. All right. So you've noticed I've added some items here, and I want to talk about the disparity. So we talked about the fact that Black clients are 17% more likely to be on the by name list for 365 days or more. Black clients are actually slightly less likely to have been prioritized for housing but not housed. I still think it's important that we add these items because there were some other clients on the list that were not being evaluated as needing PSH without these because they kept not even getting to the point of being housed. And when we add these, it includes them. So this also addressed some other gaps in our ability to assess need for PSH. And adding the 365 days on the by name list sort of outweighs that. All right, so what does this do if we were to adopt this? Basically, if we adopt all of these changes to the PSH needs assessment, it essentially eliminates the disparity in who is being assessed as needing PSH, again, down to a 1% disparity, which I consider negligible. So adopting these changes would essentially eliminate that disparity. Okay, in addition to, and some of this has sort of been indicated in y'all's comments, in addition to the actual changes to the assessment, there are some other changes that that I'm recommending making, or that I myself am doing. So one thing is that talking about the barriers that we had in documentation for Black or African American clients, I actually went back and did research on, is there any areas where we have flexibility that we're not using? And indeed, we actually have a lot more flexibility for self-certification of documentation of chronic homelessness than we've been using. So I'm recommending that we start taking full advantage of that flexibility that HUD gives us, and that we've really never fully used, to make documentation less of a barrier for clients who are having trouble getting documented, and make it less likely that a client gets skipped over because they can't document their homelessness. I've already started doing this, just having more reflective conversations about assessment of need. Previously, if a provider said my client doesn't need PSH, even though the assessment is saying they do, they can go with a voucher, I would just say, okay, because in my mind, that was a good thing for the system because we don't have enough PSH anyways. But now I'm having more of a reflective conversation of just saying, okay, well, tell me about what you're thinking. Here's what I'm seeing, and just trying to push more to kind of challenge those immediate assessments. Educating providers about this issue of implicit bias, and just educating them about the disparity, and hoping that they can self-check some and be aware of, am I making kind of any kind of biased assessment of what my client needs? I am asking the providers to, when they're doing their housing barrier assessment, to sit down with their client and pull the client's publicly available record for justice involvement, to actually eliminate that disparity. And obviously we need the client's consent, but hopefully the ideal is that the provider actually sits down with the client and pulls in, and they can have a conversation about what's on there. Maybe the client isn't aware or didn't want to share for whatever reason. And then finally, I am putting more of my own time into working with the providers to help secure their clients' documentation. I think, if we really want to eliminate this disparity, it can't just be the providers working by themselves. I am actually going to have to dedicate my time to really trying to fill in those gaps so that clients don't get skipped over because of a lack of documentation. So those are some additional steps that I'm taking to help eliminate this. So that's everything I have for you today. Thanks so much for staying over I did exactly 5 minutes, impressively. And I would like to, if with the agreement of this group, start piloting these changes as soon as possible.
All right, I will entertain a vote on piloting the changes that Honolulu has shared with us as it relates to racial disparities and trying to bring things better in line for our homeless residents.
I think did we lose quorum?
Well, once you have quorum, you don't lose it. So we can move forward on everything we need to vote on.
I move that we move forward with Honolulu's recommendations for piloting for 6 months with these changes presented in today's meeting.
Have a motion.
I was going to say, and reporting back to us regarding that at the end of that period.
Okay.
Second.
So I have a motion and a second. Motion by Colleen, seconded by Ebony. All those in favor, yes, in the chat box. And I guess we just need to send a message to the other folks and let them know what we voted on. Okay. And do I need to do that, Colin?
Who did we lose? We lost Commissioner
We lost
Carter.
Drew. We lost Commissioner Carter. I think that's it. Right?
Yeah, I can send a message and copy you if you'd like.
Okay.
Miss
And
Angela as
then
well.
Angel.
Angel, yeah, that's right. And then the last thing was minutes. I think, we lost Christy.
No, Christy's
no,
here.
Christy's here. She's right there. Christy had one change to the minutes. Did anyone else see any changes that needed to happen? Drew has already given us his approval of the minutes, vote. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes in a second.
I'll make
Sure,
a
no,
motion to approve with the change that Christy asked for.
All right, motion by Helen,
I'm sorry, second,
second with Colleen. All those in favor, yes, in the chat box. And we got through with 2 minutes to spare. That's all right. I want to thank you for your time. We will convene again on May the 9th. And I hope everybody has a wonderful week and holiday if you celebrate Easter. And a day off if you don't. Take care.